Today at Deutsche Auto Parts, we're going to be going over how to install a 2.0 TSI intake from Unitronic. When installing the Unitronic intake, we're going to start by removing the electrical connector for the mass airflow sensor. And we can pull this wire out of the way. We can then go through and remove these two squeeze clamps and just kind of slide them out of the way. And work that one off. Let them go. We can then go ahead and remove this pipe. And now that's out of the way. After that, we can go ahead, there's a 5mm Allen that holds it on right here. We're using a long Allen with a ball at the end. They are a little bit easier for access, but it isn't required for this. You should be able to get in there with just a standard Allen and an extension. Get your ratchet and you loosen it up. This is the bolt that actually holds the airbox down. And now we're out of the way here. We can remove our secondary air hose pipe. All you do is squeeze and kind of wiggle it off. On the two sides is where it's intended to be squeezed, where these ribbing is. And that's all set. We can then go ahead and remove this intake duct. It has two screws, T25 Torx, that mounted to the radiator support. They are fairly simple to get to. Now that our duct is loose, we can remove this top cover just by pulling up. There's clips on either side that hold it in place. They're not very tight. It's pretty easy to get out. We can then remove this pipe from the ducting. That will get it out of the way for us. So it just slides up. It has a groove it sits in. So we can kind of just pick that up and slide it out of the way. And then we can pull this out. Make sure you're careful when removing this. There is a coolant hose here that has a small hose on it with a nipple. If you're not too careful around this, you could break that nipple off, and that's going to be not very good. We can then go ahead and remove this duct from the actual airbox itself. It does run down to the bottom of the airbox. There are some clips that hold it in place. You will need a small pocket screwdriver to get in there and push the clip in to release it so you can slide it out. It is not very easy. There's one clip on either side, and it is pretty challenging to get released. Once you do, you slide it out and pull that out of the way. Now we can go ahead and pop up the airbox. It just has a rubber grommet on this side that pulls out, and then that one screw that holds in. That's pretty much all that mounts the airbox in. And then we will have to slide it around this hose. Keep in mind, this is that coolant hose with that nipple attached to it, so you got to slide it around the edge, but if you pull too hard, you can break that off, so be careful of that. There is also a hose attached to the bottom of it that runs down into the, over by the headlight. If we take a look here, that's what it is. It isn't attached to anything at the other end, so you can just pull that out. Just make sure you don't break it off. So our airbox is out. With the airbox removed from the vehicle, you will need to remove the mass airflow sensor. This will need to be reinstalled on the new Unitronic intake. This is something that is a fairly easy swap. T25 Torx. You can go ahead and remove the screws. There's only 2 of them. And this kind of just will twist out. It does have a seal in there, so it's a pretty tight fit, and then now it's out. This will be used in the new intake and you'll swap it over. Now we're going to go ahead and remove this pipe. This pipe runs from where the airbox was now into the turbo. To access it, it's just for demonstration purposes, we're going to remove the engine cover. It isn't a requirement, but it will give you a little bit easier access to take a look. There is a mounting bracket right underneath here with a T30 Torx that holds it on. We can start by removing that. Get our ratchet in there. And once you get it loosened up, you can actually just loosen it the rest of the way by hand. Now that's loose. Now that we have 2 clamps that hold the bracket on, the pipe onto the turbo. Get in there, loosen them up, pull them out of the way, and now our pipe will be loose. Now we also, on the bottom side of this pipe from this PCV system right here, we have a hose that runs in there. You can pull the hose out of the turbo and expose that. There are some clamps that hold it on. They are pretty challenging to get off sometimes. So that's something you'll have to work with to kind of work that off. And we can remove that. Just keep in mind, you will have some oil residue that you'll find on the inside of this pipe. It does come from the PCV valve that puts crank ventilation vapors out into the intake to be reburned. So it is pretty normal to find oil in that particular place. Once we get done with that, we can actually remove the clamp for the coupler that is pretty deep down in there. And that's on the turbo side. Once we do that, once you loosen that up, you can actually just pull the whole coupler up and off at one time. Now we can put that on. This gets replaced by a Unitronic coupler, so we can go ahead and get rid of this. Now we're ready to go ahead and install the silicone coupler that's included on the turbo side. The tapered end, the smaller side, is the one that goes onto the turbo itself, and then here are the clamps that are also included with the Unitronic intake. Just keep in mind when you're installing this, the turbo is exposed right now. Make sure you don't drop anything down there. If you started the car with anything that's been falling in the turbo, you will cause damage to the turbo. Make sure when you're installing these that you have the clamps pointed in a direction that you can access it. For us, we're going to go ahead and install it with the screw side facing to the driver's side because it seems to be the best access. You can use either a Phillips flathead or these have a 7mm screw head on them. So we're going to opt for a ratchet with a 7mm screw head because it's easier to get a ratchet in there. So now we can get the silicone coupler down. We're using a fine-tooth 1/4-inch ratchet with a swivel head, so it may be challenging that to get most other ratchets in here. So you may think that a screwdriver might work better. Make sure when you have this on there that it's good and tight. And just pull the clamp, double check it, make sure it's all right. And then we can move on from there. We can then go ahead and put this clamp over. It's a little bit tight. Loosen it up some. So we can get our pipe in. Now we're going ahead and install this pipe. We have already pushed on the connector for the PCV valve, and we can reinstall it into the adapter. It is fairly simple to get in there. Just make sure you line all the lips in, and then it'll kind of just push in place. You want to make sure that you get behind here so that later you don't have, before you tighten everything down, so later you don't have a problem getting that in place. And then same as before, tighten our clamp down. Everybody can find out what works best for them, whether a screwdriver, a ratchet, or what have you. Once we've tightened up the clamps here, we can go ahead and reinstall our mounting bolt, the T30. In this situation, it's actually, because this intake is larger than the original one, it's actually easier to just get underneath here to thread this screw back in because there's not a lot of room on the top side anymore. All right, we're good and tight now. Now we can go ahead and reinstall the airbox mounting parts. Now we're going to go ahead and install the coupler at the end of this intake. It will attach to the mass airflow sensor so we can have our clamps on it's best to keep them in the best direction, mostly for aesthetics and ease of installation. So you just roll on this. Sometimes you got to get your hand on the inside a little bit just to get it over the lip, just a touch, and get it on there. It is going to be best to install the rear clamp before you proceed, just so that you can make sure that you are able to not have the silicone coupler sliding on you while you're trying to get the mass airflow sensor in place. So we got that one tight. Now we have our mass airflow sensor. There is a direction here next to the VW and Audi number, the logo and the part number here, that shows you the direction of the airflow. The arrow is pointing in this direction, which means that's the airflow goes into the turbo. So we slide that in place. Again, make sure you have your clamp already on there. Otherwise, you'll have to take it back out once you get it in place. And it's good to kind of roll it around a little bit to get it seated in place like that. And then you can kind of twist it and kind of rock it in place. All right. Make sure that your mass airflow connector is facing upwards to keep it consistent with the way it was originally. Get your clamp in place and tighten it down. Make sure when you tighten these on that the whole clamp is actually on where they're supposed to be. Sometimes they get uneven and you'll end up tightening down just part way on. So make sure they are even. Now we can go ahead and plug in our mass airflow sensor. And we're ready to install the heat shielding. This heat shielding is mounted like this. There is a bolt over here in front of the battery and fuse box. That's a 10 millimeter that is used for the rear mount over here. So we can go ahead and remove that. And all we're going to do is remove it and reinstall it. So we can get that out of there, get this in place, and put our 10 millimeter back in where we found it. Make sure that you don't pinch the wires that are underneath here. You do have to kind of push them out of the way a little bit so that that can mount. But that's all set in place. Now we're going to install this silicone hose. It attaches to the mass airflow sensor and then the bracket here. We can go ahead and just slide it in place here, and then we can turn it to mount it. In place there. Get that all lined up, and we can tighten down our clamps.